So we just got through Daniel's visions of Daniel chapter 7. And we've talked about these kingdoms that are going to come upon the whole earth. Just like Nebuchadnezzar's vision, Daniel also had this vision, and they both were of the same events, but Daniel was given far more details. And remember, who God loves, God reveals secrets to. And that's why we talk about John, the disciple who Jesus loved, gets a vivid view of Revelation. And Daniel, again, who loved God and God loved him, gets this view of the end times as well. So Daniel understood these parallels between his vision and Nebuchadnezzar's vision, right? So now let's take a closer look in Daniel chapter 9 of some of these prophecies during a separate vision. We're now at a different time. So in Daniel chapter 9, verse 20, he says, so remember, Daniel's out there, he's praying to God. He's talking to God because he knows the end of the Babylonian captivity is coming. And God is going to send him a message through the angels. He's going to tell him something. So we go to verse 20. It says, while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people, Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, this is the angel, whom I had seen in the visions at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. So here we have an interrupted prayer. Daniel is trying to say, guys, we got to pray. We got to ask God's forgiveness of our sins because the time has come for us to return to Israel. And while he's praying, Gabriel shows up and interrupts him. Verse 22, and he informed me and talked with me and said, oh, Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications, when you started praying, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. You want to know why you get the secrets? Because you love God and he loves you. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. So we have the 70 weeks now being revealed, okay? This is something which we've talked about in the Revelation study. So now we get to chapter 9, verse 24. He says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. So this is just for Israel and Jerusalem. There are 70 weeks of history left for them, okay? To do what? To finish the transgression, to make an end of sins and make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and the prophecy and to anoint the most holy. So these 70 weeks, they're going to focus on Jewish issues. 70 weeks, it means a week is 7 days, right? So you have 70 times 7. And whenever the Bible talks about weeks, it can mean either a week, like 7 days, or 7 years, a week of years, all right? So there are things that are going to happen in this 490-year period, specifically concerning Israel or Daniel's people. So that tells you that this 70-week period, if it has to do with Israel, who does it not have to do with? The Gentiles, right? Or specifically a Gentile church. What is going to happen during the 70 weeks? And by the way, this tells you God, when he makes a prophecy, does he break it? He does not. So that tells you there is no such thing as replacement theology. God had a plan and a purpose for Israel, and he has a plan and a purpose for the church. The two are not the same. Yes, there is some spiritual connection, but the two are not the same. God doesn't leave prophecies unfulfilled. So what are we going to see happen? Finish the transgression. End sins. Has that happened yet? Okay, is the 70 weeks over yet? No. Make reconciliation for iniquity. Has anyone paid for sins? That's happened. Bring in everlasting righteousness. Has that happened yet? For us, but not for the world, right? Seal up the vision. Have all prophecies been fulfilled? Seal up the prophecy. Anoint the most holy. Has Jesus been crowned king of this earth yet? Have all these been fulfilled? Of course not. Jesus is not yet ruling from the throne of David. He has been anointed king, but he hasn't taken the throne yet. These things are yet future and specifically relate to Israel. And there are still things that need to happen in order to complete this covenant or this testament with Israel. The nation of Israel, individuals have come to salvation. Individual Jewish people, the early church was mostly Jewish, but the nation as a whole has not had their national sin forgiven. Only when the nation as a whole cry out to God, accept Jesus as their Messiah, as their Lord and their King, will he remember their sin no more. And he's desperate for it. He wants to see people saved of all nations, and he wants to see Israel restored. So once they accept him, once they realize their sin was paid for and they receive it, he comes to reign. He will no longer allow them to be under tribulation. Jeremiah 31, verse 33 says, down through 34, but this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord. The Jews will not need to evangelize the Jews, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, saith the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. There will come a time where every surviving Jew will be part of God's people. They'll have accepted Jesus as their Messiah. And that's a future prophecy given to Jeremiah after Israel was already the people of God. So they thought, but they had not accepted the Messiah, right? But there will be a time coming.
There's something in Romans that talks about all the things.
Yeah.
But again, it's all
Talking about right now, there's a national blindness, but God is not done with Israel. And anyone who teaches you that is contradicting the Bible. There will be a day coming during the tribulation where 144,000 Jewish men, virgins, will preach the truth. Well, why would they be there if the church is there? Shouldn't the church be preaching the truth? It's almost as if the church is somewhere else and we need other witnesses there, right? Someone's going to have to tell Israel, because that's the goal of the tribulation, who their Messiah is, right? Who their Savior is. And there's going to be 2 Jewish witnesses there too, preaching to them as well. God has to fulfill this prophecy because he is a God that delights in keeping his promises. Israel cannot be replaced no matter what anyone tells you. This time, the 70 weeks, is for the people of Israel, the house of Israel. So in Daniel 9, verse 25, we read, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, the wall even in troublous times. So 60 is 60. 62 plus 7 is how many? Who does math? 69. So between the commandment to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince, comes into Jerusalem, is going to be 69 weeks of years. So if you do some math, right, that comes out to 483 years, okay? So out of 490, right? Cyrus in 537 BC, as recorded in Ezra chapter 1, verse 2, he gave a decree to rebuild the temple, not Jerusalem. Darius in Ezra chapter 6, verse 1 through 5, and then again in verse 8 and 12, gives another decree to rebuild the temple, not Jerusalem. Artaxerxes in 458 BC in Ezra chapter 7, verse 11 to 26, gives another decree to rebuild the temple. That's not has anything to do with the prophecy, right? Finally, Artaxerxes in 445 BC, he says, I want you to go and rebuild Jerusalem, rebuild the walls, fix it up, using the historical 360-day calendar, not 365 like we use today. And you actually can count the calendars by people smarter than me. I'm not the one who can do all this math. That comes down to a very specific day. It's the day a Jewish teacher came riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, on the colt, the foal of a donkey, right? And people were laying down palm leaves and laying down their clothes, saying, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." Not a week before, not a week after, the day of. They were calling him king. Do you notice that Jesus did something really weird? A few weeks earlier, they wanted to make him king. He refused. He said, "No, I won't do it." Why? Because it's not the time appointed. God had a very specific day when he would allow himself to be crowned king. Jesus had a very specific day. He had to tell his own mom, "It's not my time yet. You're throwing my schedule off." You guys remember that story? Right? Because the timeline has to go according as God has said it. That is how it is. Okay? He made it clear he had to ride in on a set time. He had to be crucified on a set time. In John chapter 6, verse 14, gives us one of those examples. He said, "Those men which saw the miracle that Jesus did said, 'This is of a truth the prophet which will come into the world.' When Jesus there perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed into a mountain by himself alone." In John chapter 7, verse 28, then cried Jesus in the temple as he taught, saying, "You both know me, and you know from whence I am, and I am not come of myself, but he that sent me is true, whom you know not." You don't even know God, is what he tells them. "But I know him and am from him, and he has sent me." Then they sought to take him, but no man laid hands on him. Why? Because his hour was not yet come. They couldn't make him king when they wanted, and they couldn't kill him when they wanted. He set the time. Jesus was never out of control. He was always in control of all things. You see that he has a set time, right? He had a very specific day that he'd ride in on a donkey. He intentionally performed everything to make sure he would be killed on Passover day. He wanted to die then because he was the Passover lamb, buried through the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and to rise at the Feast of First Fruits because he's our first fruit. But do you know what's scary? Jesus expected Israel to know the prophecies. He expected them to know when he was going to ride in, so they didn't have to guess who the Messiah was. Think about that. Remember when Jesus was going to be born? He asked the people, "Hey, where's he going to be?" "Oh, it's going to be in Bethlehem." But not a single one of them went to see. Think about that. They knew when he was supposed to come. They knew that the prophecies were there. People were coming from across the world, and the people who were right there in the next city over didn't take the time to say, "Well, I better go check this out too," right? In Luke chapter 19, are we supposed to study prophecy? Let's see, Luke chapter 19, verse 41 says, "When he was come near," when Jesus was come near, "he beheld the city. He looked at Jerusalem and wept over it, saying, If thou hadst known, even thou at least this in thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes." If you had just known your day, this was your day, your Messiah just got here. If you had just known. So what's the punishment or the consequences, I'll say, for not having known their Messiah? "For the day shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee around, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave one stone upon another." Why? Because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. It broke God's heart and continues to. See what's happening to Israel around the world, to how Jews are mistreated, how they're hated. It breaks God's heart. It's not by him wanting to say, "Ha ha, that's what you get." No, he's saying, "Please, if you would just have come to me, if you would just have accepted it." In Daniel chapter 9, continuing on, verse 26, it says, "And after 62 weeks," so after these 69 weeks, so after the time that he rides in, what's going to happen? "Shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself." Somebody's going to kill the Messiah, but not for himself? Who did he kill him for? Who did they kill Jesus for? For you, for me, exactly. "And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. So after the Messiah comes, 69 weeks a year, 483 years from the time of the rebuilding of Jerusalem, from the time he comes, there's going to be a destruction of the of Jesus. He's going to be killed, right? For the people, for the nation, for us. And then the prince that is coming, the people of the prince that is coming, is going to destroy Jerusalem and the temple. Okay? There will be war from there forward, devastating the whole region until the end. Do you guys know one of the most places constantly under war? The Middle East, right? Particularly surrounding the area of Israel. So if there's a prince that shall come, right? The events between those 69 weeks and the 70th week, right? If there's a prince that's going to come and destroy all this stuff, there has to be a period of time between it. Okay? So something is going to happen between the 69 weeks until the coming of the Messiah, and when the Messiah is cut off, and when the Antichrist takes the throne. There's a period of time there. Do you follow that? So that means that during that time, you're going to have a mystery that's revealed. That mystery is the Gentile church. There's a period called the time of the Gentiles, and there's something that happens called the fullness of the Gentiles. We're going to see of these Gentiles, God wants to save them too. God has never intended to only save Israel. He has always intended to offer his salvation to all people. He wanted to use Israel to do that. Israel wouldn't have it. That's where the church comes in, right? So the church has a completely separate origin and completely separate purpose than Israel. Israel was nationally blinded. Again, Jesus said it back in Luke 19:42, till you say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. When does that blindness finish? And Ginger mentioned it earlier, when the times of the Gentiles are over, when we resume that 70th week of Israel, right? So in Romans 11:25, it says, for I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery. Paul reveals mysteries. God gave him special knowledge, lest you should be wise in your own conceits. Blindness is in part happened to Israel. Israel as a nation will not accept until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Once we have completed the time of the Gentiles, then we can resume with Israel. There is 1 week left after the fullness of the Gentiles. Still the times of the Gentiles, but 1 week left after the fullness. That is when nationally Israel can turn back to God. The blindness is lifted. Go ahead.
Verse 26 there in Daniel 9.
Mhm.
Even in the King James, it's 62 weeks, and mine says 62 weeks. So
Mhm.
why does it not say 69?
Because it talked about the 7 weeks above. So read the two together. So if we go back to verse 25, that from going, so whenever it talks about, so imagine if I said, just trying to think of a way to put it. If I said, hey, after 1 week and 1 month, right, we're going to go to Disney World, right? So I said, after that month, we went to Disney World. That implies that the week has passed, the month has passed, then we're going to Disney World. So if you look at verse 25, he says that after 62, so going forth the commandment, okay, shall be 7 weeks. So verse 25 says, from the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and then the street shall be built again. And then continuing in verse, so then he's saying, so after that middle section, the 62 weeks, does that make sense to everyone? Are you following that? Okay. Okay. So again, that 1 week left after the Gentiles are full, that is when Israel can turn back to God. That blindness has been lifted. So what do we understand for the Gentiles being full? Well, we know that there are going to be a whole bunch of people saved during that week of tribulation, during that final week, right? We know that a week is 7 years, but the Gentiles are full prior to that 7-year period. So anyone saved in the last 7 years is someone above the fullness of the Gentiles, after the Gentiles are full. And there are different views on that. But I believe that to mean once the church is complete, we resume the 7-year period for Israel. And during that time, many will be saved, but that's separate from the church, or specifically the bride of Christ. So verse 27, going back to the Antichrist now. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So he's going to make a deal with many people. That means all the nations under him and Israel for 1 week, for 7 years, he's going to make a covenant. And in the midst of the week, in the middle of the week, again, this is a week that all excludes the fullness of the Gentiles. It's already happened. So during that final week, in the middle of it, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. For the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So now we have 70 weeks appointed to Daniel, right? And Daniel's people specifically. The final week is one where there's a covenant made with Israel and many other nations. And in the middle of that week, he breaks it by putting an abomination, maybe a statue, maybe AI, maybe a digital thing. We don't know, but he puts it in the temple, defiling the temple of God. So that's called the abomination of desolation. And the book of Revelation, the majority of it, from where we're starting next time forward, is a commentary on that 1 week. It's a commentary on those 7 years that have to do with the tribulation. The introduction of the Antichrist begins the 70th week. He makes the covenant for 1 week, and again, middle of it, breaks it. So the Gentiles are full before that treaty's ever made, or that treaty's ever enforced, I should say. So that treaty is enforced after the fullness of the Gentiles. So I don't really know how anyone explains that away, but the last week deals with Israel, the time of Jacob's trouble, because it specifically relates to Jacob. Had Israel accepted Jesus as the Messiah, the millennium could have occurred then. We could have been born into the millennium, right? Of course, it's been more than 1,000 years, but we could have been born into the millennium, right? That could have occurred at the resurrection. They could have realized this is the Messiah, right? But they rejected him, and they were dispersed among the nations for their own sake. Genesis 6:3, the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. So the point being, God sometimes limits things for our own good. Now, we're done with tonight's study, and this is just one theory that I don't endorse. It's just a thought someone had, and I thought it was very interesting, right? Just interesting. I'm not saying it's biblical. That verse I just read about the 120 years, God said, I'm not going to deal with mankind forever. I'll deal with them for 120 years. So people interpret that many different ways. They say that the average lifespan of a human won't exceed 120 years. And that actually pans out. The oldest person in modern history is 122, right? So it's really close to that. Some people say that it'll be 120 years until the flood comes. And I actually hold to that one more than anything else. But some people believe that when he's talking about 120 years, he's talking in a prophetic way to speak of Jubilee years, okay? So in the case, then that means that that man's time will end after 120 Jubilees, okay? So the Jubilees, well, if you multiply 120 times 50, because the year of Jubilee was every 50th year, you end up with the number of 6,000 years. My spirit will only strive with man for 6,000 years, and their time's up. Again, I am not a date setter. It's just interesting that there are all kinds of theories that float around. They're just theories. That's all they are. But that would fit in with that idea that the earth will last 6,000 years, and 7,000 will be that year of rest, or the 1,000 years of Christ. All right, guys. Any final questions? Any final thoughts?
What's next week then?
So